Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started in 6 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started in 5 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started in 4 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started in 3 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started in 2 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started in 1 minute.
Hey everybody, good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on sustainable procurement. We're just a couple of days away from Earth Day, so we thought this seemed like a good topic to tackle for late April. We have a couple of great guests with us today. Jeff Kosis is the interim chair of the U.S. Ability One Commission and is the senior procurement executive at GSA. Jeff's also a recent presidential rank award winner, so congratulations again, Jeff. Mike Darios is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Acquisition and the Senior Procurement Executive at the State Department. Mike was previously the Senior Procurement Executive and Head of Contracting Activity at the United States Coast Guard. Mike, thanks to you for joining us. I'd also note that both our speakers serve together on the board of the Federal Acquisition Institute, so they are no strangers to one another. So again, welcome to you both. Thanks for making time with us today to address this important topic. The audience is really fortunate to be able to hear from both of you, right? Leaders and experts in the field. It's not often that people get 60 minutes, right, to talk about a topic like this with two people like you. So let me give a little lead in and then I'll kick it off with a few questions. And for the audience, be thinking of questions as we move along here, and we'll try and address them topically as they come up. So the executive order on green procurement was signed in December 2021. So we're coming up on 18 months or so. So it seems like a good time to check in on implementation. The executive order, in the words of a fellow named Christopher Eukins from GW's law school, aims to, quote, use public procurement to model sustainable, environmentally sound purchasing to reduce greenhouse gases and other forms of pollution, end quote. It comes amid really an incredible amount of regulatory action. I was talking to a former government colleague earlier this month who's tracking 31 executive orders that impact the acquisition workforce at this particular individual's agency. And there are a number of FAR cases working their way through the process as well. While not on this topic, for example, there are 10 FAR cases currently in motion on supply chain risk management. So a lot of regulatory activity. So given this backdrop, we wanted to take a little bit of time and focus on this executive order 14057, which is called Catalyzing Clean Energy Industries and Jobs Through Federal Sustainability. So again, to get it started, I've got a question one question along each of four dimensions. We'll talk people, process, technology, and data related to implementing the order. And again, for folks out in the audience, as we're getting into the discussion, if you think of questions, go ahead and fire those in, and we'll try and address them as we go along. So Mike, I'll start with you. Let's talk people, because I think probably both you and Jeff would agree. It always starts with people. Chat GPT notwithstanding, right? We still need people. Just Mike, give us a sense at State. What are some of the ways that the acquisition workforce at State is adapting to the guidance established in the executive order? Have you done any specialized training? Have you created any new roles on the team? Just give us some sense for for how you're tackling this at State.
Sure. Yeah. Appreciate the opportunity to chat today. It's an important topic. And State's got a pretty broad acquisition portfolio. I mean, obviously we've got the domestic spend, but our entire footprint almost is overseas. I'd say 95% of our facilities and infrastructure are overseas. And so we've got really two acquisition workforces. We've got an acquisition workforce that supports all the domestic programs, and then we've got an acquisition workforce out there in the field that's being done by our general services officer contracting team. And so we are doing some things to try to educate really the entirety of this workforce. I just wanted to illustrate kind of how broad it is. Our policy shop has really been the focal point for us. They've done webinars, trying to educate the workforce on the executive order, trying to participate in cross-functional working groups with other stakeholders in the department to assess the requirements of the EO, look for where there are opportunities across the enterprise to get after it. We've also, speaking of new roles, it's not really a new role, but what we've done is added sustainability to the portfolio of our Director for Strategic Enterprise Programs. A lot of folks in industry probably know Jaime Gracia, that's who I'm talking about, is a very broad portfolio supporting our front office. But we thought that that was a good fit to kind of park this there because we see the opportunity to leverage synergies in other areas like category management, vendor management, industry liaison outreach, and then cognitive procurement tools. Those are all things that are in his portfolio, and putting him kind of at the forefront along with the policy shop. I think is something that is going to yield good fruit for us over time. I guess one thing I would offer in terms of also pulsing the workforce, we recently did, I'll share with you a best practice that's really only 3 weeks old. I'm really excited about this. So our policy shop periodically goes out and they do focused reviews with some of the posts overseas. And they did a little policy innovation roundtable at Embassy Rome. And Rome wanted to focus on sustainability. So I thought that was great. What came out of that was they had developed an SOP that we are now going to roll out as a best practice policy across the department. They've come up with a way of just looking at trying to identify sustainable alternatives as their requisitions are coming up. And so they've created a little matrix that they're going to use in an SOP that they're going to use to really vet all the requirements that are coming out of that shop, looking at whether or not those requirements can and should result in a more sustainable acquisition. So, are there opportunities for a vendor or a product to hold certain eco-friendly certifications? Should we be looking at mandates for low emission transportation and delivery solutions? Really, going all in on low waste disposal methods in terms of like recycling and reuse. So this team, they've developed this SOP that they're going to start using to vet requirements in terms of sustainability. We like it so much, we're rolling it out to all the people that do acquisition in the enterprise. And so that's what I would offer to start in terms of the things that state's doing in that space.
That's great, Mike. Thanks. I think maybe you could call that wherever you are in the world, do as the Romans do, right? In that instance, yeah. Slight modification. Jeff, I would offer same question to you, but you have a really interesting perch, right? Because you, in your role at GSA, you see, you have really a government-wide perspective, right? So maybe just some sense for some things you've seen either at GSA or in other places across the federal government with respect to people in the order.
Absolutely, Alan. First, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation, hitting a lot of very important topics today. Let me offer 4 thoughts on this one. First, it really helps that we have a history in GSA of being particularly active in this area. We've been developing things for years. FAS has a Sustainable Facilities, or SF tool, that has all kinds of resources to help the acquisition workforce plan, explore, learn, and procure. Our Public Building Service has years of focusing on how do we reduce the climate impact on federal buildings and a green proving ground. So it's not a new concept to us. Second, we saw what was going on and started taking preliminary steps last fall. We changed our acquisition review boards so that the Chief Sustainability Officer or his designee is a mandatory invitee to all of our review boards. We issued policy changes to require that sustainability be much more formally analyzed and considered in acquisition strategy documents. And we started encouraging the workforce to think about sustainability at each phase of the acquisition lifecycle, trying to give them some clear top cover to consider externalities as part of a best value determination. Third, our Federal Acquisition Institute, that's the training arm for all the civilians across the federal acquisition community, They developed a new 1-hour course for program managers that's focused on climate adaptation and climate risk. And maybe the most impactful, we formed a new federal advisory committee to help us focus on issues of sustainability and federal acquisition. We solicited volunteers, and we got over 100 applicants from incredibly and talented people all over the country, representing businesses large and small, academia, colleges and universities, nonprofits, state, federal, local. A lot of people very eager to volunteer their time and their knowledge. Well, pretty quickly, they formed 3 subcommittees, one of which is focused on recommendations for the acquisition workforce. So they're helping us think through what's the best way to socialize this, to introduce this, to champion this within our workforce. And they're on track to give us their initial recommendations in a public meeting, not 2 weeks from today on May 4th.
That's great, Jeff. We'll come back to the committee in a later question when we talk data. But thanks for the rundown there. Let's stick with you, Jeff, and talk process. Right. So we covered people a little bit. Let's talk process. Can you just give us, Jeff, a sense? What's the process that an agency goes through to implement an executive order like this and really get people down at the line level to act on it? As you well know, right? Hey, you can write, there can be executive orders, there can be policy memos, right? You can sort of issue policy from Washington, right? But what do you do? What does an agency do to really get folks at the line level to implement the guidance?
Okay, Alan, let me kind of start that from my role in the FAR Council and then drill down to the agency specific level. But normally, when an important executive order like this one is issued, there's an office within the White House that's going to be the policy lead, and that office is going to engage the interagency community. So in sustainability, it's CEQ, the Council for Environmental Quality. Typically, also what will happen within a significant executive order is that OMB is going to issue an M for management memo. If I remember correctly, on this one, OMB issued their management memo real close to the executive order. But the management memo, it's going to talk about things that, hey, agencies, think about management actions, think about policy changes, and think about regulatory changes. Management actions, those are the things that could happen the fastest. So, so the OMB memo itself told agencies to start establishing goals and defining duties of agency heads in this space. If I drill down to the agency level, the management action, well, that's the acquisition plan. That's the acquisition strategy. How are we thinking that this at the time of the buy? Said that policy changes are second. For example, the memo says, GSA, go develop guidelines for federal green leases. And all the other agencies that lease follow green leasing guidelines for leases over a certain time. Regulations, they are by far the longest part of the implementation process. For our case, it's typically going to take 18 months. When it's a really complex, controversial rule, it may take quite a bit longer. On the regulatory front, we work with our colleagues in DoD, NASA, Office of Federal Procurement Policy, and the White House lead to figure out how do we take that EO and put it in the FAR. For things like this one, we have a standing FAR team on sustainability. It's made up of procurement experts from several of the civilian and defense agencies. EPA, Department of Energy, USDA all play really big roles here. So the teams, they're going to work together. They'll develop a proposed rule that's really consistent with that OMB memo, the overall strategic direction. They'll put it out for comment, analyze comments, make revisions, and publish a final rule. Then we have to implement it at the agency level, because the FAR, that's going to give you a good picture, but there's going to be implementation details that GSA needs to do, or Mike that state needs to do, or whatever else. So we're also tracking it through the process to figure out what do I need to change in the GSA processes so it's meaningful for our workforce. So Alan, there's stuff we can do right away. That's mainly in acquisition strategy. But then there's stuff that is going to take weeks to months to a year plus to get to a full implementation.
Okay, got it. Thank you, Jeff. Mike, before I turn to you, and I'm going to ask you about evaluating proposals and sort of how the EO has maybe factored or changed how you do that. There's a quick question, Jeff, that came in that I think can answer. So how can members of the audience attend the May 4th public meeting that you mentioned, Jeff? Is there and if there's a link or something, we can put that out at the end of the webinar here.
Alan, we'll send you the link, but we post the public meetings in the Federal Register. So we've posted the announcement. There's both a in-person option and a virtual option, because we will stream the meeting for anyone who does want to watch it.
Got it. Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. So Mike, yeah, let me turn to you. Let's talk about evaluating proposals, right? You know, what are COs doing in terms of trying to bake in the guidance in the executive order to how they evaluate proposals? And there's a question that came in here that says, how can we show the value of procuring sustainable goods versus lower cost items? You know, how can you educate stakeholders and show the importance of procuring these alternatives, which I think sort of fits in with, you know, how are you going to evaluate proposals, right? And maybe, you know, maybe give some weight to green versus cost. So I'll throw that over to you, Mike. Get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Whoever asked that question, thank you. That was a perfect segue. So our policy shop is considering drafting guidance and or going as far as saying certain things may be hard policy in terms of trying to level the playing ground a little bit. So factoring in environmental impacts as a part of the best value determination, right? That's something that we're playing around with some language right now in that space. Also, trying to figure out how we would roll language out that arms a contracting officer with the ability to place, to your point, a little bit more weight, you know, on the sustainable product or service than for a non-sustainable product or service, taking into consideration total life cycle costs. So that means looking at the measurable cost of any associated environmental impact that might be attributed to the non-sustainable product or service, and then using that as a means to place potentially more weight in favor of the sustainable product or service. So we are looking at playing with some language and offering some guidance and or hard policy for the contracting officer community. But we're going further than just, you know, how we evaluate the contracts. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about some of the specific things that we're doing outside of just, you know, policy work. So we're really trying to prioritize multi-attribute products and services that meet at least one statutory mandate and one or more of the applicable requirements or EPA recommendations. So we're talking about things like water sense, safer choice, smart way, you know, the EPA recommendations for federal purchasing, right? That's out there. That's a fantastic resource. We want to leverage that and really kind of bake it into our DNA, so to speak, in terms of just how we develop requirements and put those out for bid. Another big thing that we're into is really looking at our portfolio and no kidding, trying to reduce and phase out the procurement of single-use plastic products to the maximum extent practicable. So we're looking at policy that could add some specific contract language around specs. And also, again, you know, trying to chunk some of the executive orders together, looking at specs and the need for American-made products. So, you know, reducing Chinese-made single-use plastics at some of our installations. Looking at also adding specs into some of our big IDIQs. So we have large O&M contracts overseas that support, you know, an entire embassy or consulate footprint. And so we want to start in those existing contracts adding in specifications for sustainable products. So, you know, if you're going to compete for a task order under a big strategic source vehicle like Bliss, you might see some requirements for sustainability in those future task orders. We're also looking to pilot some regional IDIQs for some specific sustainable products overseas. For example, cutlery, forks and knives. There's no reason that we have to be relying on plastic in our cafeterias, right? So that, I mean, I could go on and on. Power purchase agreements. Maybe I'll end on that note. Really exploring a pilot for rolling out power purchase agreements at our overseas facilities. So this would start to introduce solar power where feasible. May not be able to do this across the entirety of our overseas portfolio, but there might be some strategic opportunities to start working with third-party developers where we're agreeing to host on our site, their system, but they own it, they operate it. But in exchange, we're getting an offsite on our utility bills. And the developer is selling the power generated at a fixed rate, so typically lower than what we would get on the local economy. So we're exploring the usage of power purchase agreements as well. These are just some of the things that we're doing, Alan. We're really taking it serious at state because we realize that we are one of the agencies that has a very big footprint, and although that's not solely, it's mostly overseas, it still matters. So hopefully that gives you some sense.
No, it's great. It's great, Mike. And I'm going to stick with you when we turn to technology. And actually, I think you can probably just along the same line of thinking there address this, right? But when we think about buying technology, so I think people can easily sort of conceive, construction or actual products, right? Easy to think about sort of green criteria, right? But how about when we buy technology, and the government's increasingly buying technology as a service? So let's take, cloud and data centers, for example, right? Consume an incredible amount of energy. It is, you have vendors out there increasingly touting some of their green credentials, right? And even offering kind of dashboards and things that would allow customers to see sort of what kind of footprint, what sort of emissions footprint, right, are you generating by using the cloud? So do you think this is going to be an increasingly large factor in the purchase of technology, particularly technology as a service? So kind of answer that, and then Jeff, I'll come to you with the same question after Mike's done.
Yeah, so I won't get into IRM's lane. That's our CIO shop, but I'm very interested in partnering with them to see if we can go in that direction. So very similar almost to what we've done with the CISO, Donna Bennett and her group, to when it comes to cybersecurity and software supply chain, where we're now asking contractors to show us their software bill of materials, right? Well, I could see us starting to get into something along the lines of show us your environmental, your sustainable environmental bill of materials, so to speak, right? Give us insight into your supply chain, and give us some reassurance that you're employing sustainable practices. So I don't want to commit our IRM partners to anything just yet, but absolutely we are thinking about going in that direction. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thanks, Mike. Jeff, how about you? What's your perspective on sort of the impact of green on the purchase of technology, particularly technology as a service?
Alan, actually, let me back up and also hit your process question first, if that's okay. So within the Inflation Reduction Act, GSA was given about $2.15 billion for building materials with lower embodied concrete. So we're working closely with EPA, trying to figure out what are some of those building materials. We think that they're likely concrete, asphalt, steel, and glass, and starting to look through and figure out how do we align that to renovation of public buildings and help move towards a zero environmental footprint across all of them. There's clearly all kinds of things going on with the federal fleet with electric vehicles. You all see that all the time, the whole transformation of the auto industry. Well, one of the roles that GSA has also been given is helping jumpstart the infrastructure around that, charging stations and the like. So you've just seen fast stand up a newsfeed of BPAs around charging station products and services, and you saw PBS award their first ever government-wide IDIQ around design installation services. So you see GSA starting to get really involved in how do we help get to that coast-to-coast charging station infrastructure for electric vehicles. Mike talked about a couple of things that very much resonated with me. He talked about single-use plastics. A few months ago, we went out with an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, asking some questions about single-use plastics, trying to get some sense if we were to move forward with a potential regulation in that lane, asking for thoughts, assessments, ideas on where to focus in that. We got all kinds of comments. We've also asked our advisory committee to offer us some thoughts on that. And I'm hoping that we will see some recommendations in that space as well to help us to move forward. Mike talked about solar and power purchase agreements. We are very definitely thinking about that, and particularly, what is it and how do we promote the domestic solar industry through the power of acquisition? And so we've been working towards user guides and best practices and some other tips to really assist in buying domestic solar power. So tremendous amount going on there. And we also have another FAR rule coming down the pike that hits this space. This is on the climate-related financial risk executive order. That's the one that says, hey, agencies, integrate climate risk into the procurement process. So that's also going through the rulemaking process. But it's about figuring out how do we use major agency procurements to minimize the risk of climate change. How do we require that consideration of the social cost of greenhouse gas emissions? So there's a lot happening in this space. And then, Alan, you asked me about the technology side of that.
Maybe I was going to say, just continue on, maybe address technology. What do you think the impact on the purchase of technology is?
It's huge. The energy consumption with a typical data center is much higher than with any other of our facilities. So we have our climate experts, our scientists, really looking at that. And that ties right into everything about cloud computing and working with customers to help them move from the data center to a cloud computing model. It's part of the reason that we've been spending a lot of time thinking about how do we better buy cloud computing? How do we move closer to a lot of the commercial model in that space? Last year, the CIO Council and the Information Technology Industry Council hosted a two-day summit really looking at these kinds of questions. How do we help transition from the government-owned data centers to commercial cloud computing software as a service type of model? So yeah, Alan, lots happening there.
Yeah, no, that's great, Jeff. Appreciate the rundown. Yeah, I'm gonna before we go on and talk about data for a couple questions I have in that area. We have a few questions that have come in from the group here as we've been having our discussion. So let me throw those out. Jeff, maybe I'll start with you, and then Mike, if you want to jump in on this one, you can. This is a bit of a philosophical question, right? What is the definition of sustainable? Someone asks. So I don't know if there is an actual definition out there, but Jeff, do you want to maybe kind of address that and address how acquisition and procurement folks are thinking about that?
Alan, to me, that's actually one of the things that, again, I keep coming back to our advisory committee, but that's some of the things that we've been talking to them about. One, I have lots of companies, lots of industry associations, lots of groups that are coming in and saying, hey, the single most important climate issue you need to take on is X. And there have probably been 5 or 6 in the last few months saying that that is the most pressing issue. Have lots of companies saying their products are better in terms of sustainability because it hits attribute, whatever it may be. We're concerned about the danger of greenwashing. We're concerned that we want to have clear, objective, and consistent criteria on those types of issues. So having a panel of experts, folks who know and understand both acquisition and sustainability, that's really important to us. I have lots of folks who tell me that we should be focused on PFAS, for example. Others tell me we should be focused on single-use plastics, and we can run through the whole gamut of issues.
Mhm.
So, I don't know those answers, but I know enough to say, hey, we need some advice from some experts, and that's where we are in the process.
Yeah, no, it's great. Makes sense. Yeah, you talked about greenwashing a little bit. If you're someone who pays attention to what they eat, right, you know that the USDA's definition of natural, right, isn't what many of us would consider natural. Right? I'd hate to see the same thing happen here. Mike, any thoughts on that kind of reaction to what Jeff said, or just some general thoughts on the definition of sustainable?
Yeah, no, I agree with what Jeff threw out there, and I guess I would say I'm going to offer the standard. It depends, right? But for me, we focus mostly on what sustainability means as it relates to procurement, right? And my simple definition of that, how we're the lens that we're looking at it at State is assessing, the supply chains of the companies that we're doing business with, making sure that they are trying to do right by the environment. Okay, and that they are mindful of the impacts that their supply chains have on the environment, and our social responsibility in doing that as it relates to government contracts, enforcing that, and then as it relates to our customer base, right? For me, sustainable procurement is making sure that we're getting good value as we're trying to employ sustainable practices. So I've got to meet the needs of the customer. There are going to be times when that may not be a solution that is as environmentally friendly as we would like. When we're going to have to do that, let's still make sure, though, that we are taking the impacts into consideration and trying to, through the life of the contract, reduce those impacts. That's one piece. But then obviously up front, when we're going to enter into a new contract, absolutely, like some of the stuff we talked about earlier, absolutely taking into consideration that cost benefit analysis and throwing a little bit more weight on the side of the the sustainable products and services. So striking that balance for me is what sustainability is all about. I mean, I think my point is it probably means something different to different people, right? That's why I say it depends, but I'm just giving you my perspective as it relates to procurement.
No, that's great. Yeah, and that, to Jeff's point, hey, it's a big country. People are going to have lots of opinions, lots of different ideas. It's one reason why you solicit input from the outside, right, to try and get some consensus. So another question that came in here for both of you, start with you, Mike, but then Jeff, there's a piece of it in here for you also. So the question says, GSA has recently added disclosure of greenhouse gas emissions as an evaluation criteria for Oasis Plus and Alliant 3 in the draft RFPs. And those RFPs, contractors will receive points for disclosing scope 1 and scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions. So the question, Mike, for you from this individual is, has State considered using disclosure of GHG emissions as an evaluation criterion? And then Jeff, there's a separate question of, does GSA intend to include that criterion in future RFPs? So Mike, to you first on that item.
Yeah, I can't say that we have thought about that specifically, but I think all things are on the table. That's a fantastic suggestion, and I'm actually going to take that back. I know that we are thinking about parts of the portfolio where we can do some pilots and work with requirements owners, again, on developing solutions that meet their needs, but result in low emissions products. But in terms of using that as an eval factor, I actually like that. So had not thought about that. Very interested in exploring that with those existing RFPs that are out there. So thank you for the suggestion.
Yep. Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. Jeff, how about will this be a regular feature, do you think, in future RFPs from GSA, particularly some of these big, Oasis and Alliant, right, have huge impact because they're government, either max or GWACs, right, that everybody across the government can use huge spending volumes through there. So thoughts on that?
One of the things that GSA tries to emphasize, especially on the major acquisitions, is a lot of industry engagement and involvement. So what you saw us do was put out draft solicitations, floating some concepts. In both the OASIS and Alliant 3 solicitations, we used a model where companies follow a self-scoring model. They get points for a whole number of things.
Right.
Somewhere around 3% of the potential points were for self-disclosure on greenhouse gas emissions. On OASIS, we got a lot of feedback, a lot of reaction pro and con on that. In the second draft solicitation, we kept that as an evaluation factor for OASIS Plus Prime, but removed that as an evaluation factor for the socioeconomic OASIS small business family. Again, we got some definite feedback, and in the next several days, I think we'll be putting out the live solicitation. So I don't want to preempt any announcements on final decisions, but it was a definite point where we got a lot of feedback, a lot of reaction. Some folks who thought it was a fabulous idea, some folks who thought it was not such a fabulous idea. Folks telling us that we need to think about differently for different socioeconomic and business sizes. So let's figure that out on our OASIS Plus acquisition. Let's figure out, does this work? Does it achieve what we're after? If it works, if it achieves what we're after, are we going to replicate it? Absolutely. If it was one of these great ideas that didn't go anywhere, well, we'll try something different the next time.
Sounds like a plan. Test and learn, right?
Exactly.
Before committing. Makes sense. Okay, so thanks to both of you for taking a couple questions on the fly. So let's talk data. I've got a question queued up on data. There's also a question from the audience that's come in that I think is related. So let me ask sort of the general question first. We'll go to you, Jeff, and then we'll weave in the question from the audience. So obviously, to properly implement the executive order, right, it requires data, particularly from industry. You mentioned the advisory committee that's up and running. Understand they haven't, issued any recommendations or thoughts yet, but can you give us maybe give us some sense for what you think might be coming down the pike in terms of what the committee might propose to help industry think about how to gather the data required to implement the executive order? Do you have any sort of preview or sense for what they might be thinking there?
Yeah. So again, our advisory committee has 3 subcommittees. One's giving us recommendations about workforce. One's giving us recommendations about practice and policy, and one is focused on industry. Well, all of our subcommittee meetings are also public, so I can certainly share some of what they talked about in their public meetings. And they've actually floated the idea that they might want to have 5, 6, 7 recommendations over the next 2 years. One of the things that they seemed really interested in is can GSA create a maturity model for industry to help companies evaluate themselves and their readiness to address this set of issues. Don't know if that's going to make the cut for their initial recommendations, but they're definitely talked heavily about that in multiple meetings and definitely seem to have some interest. And I think are going to tell us either now or later that there's likely to be some value. What I don't know is what might that maturity model look like? What are some key attributes? But very intriguing idea.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Mike, how about you on this topic? Are you hearing anything from industry in terms of the data they might be required to gather? Any sense for what they're thinking or yeah? So just have you gotten any industry feedback in your role?
Yeah, so one of the things we're looking to do is maintain an existing relationship and membership in the Clean Energy Buyers Association, CEBA. So for those that I think you probably have a very well-educated audience here on sustainability. But for those that don't know what that is, it's a community of organizations that's really committed to trying to buy electricity from carbon-free energy sources. As a matter of fact, I think we're going out to attend a conference. Some of our people are going out to attend a conference in Seattle in a couple weeks with them. So that's one forum that we use to pulse industry. Always on the lookout to hear about it. We're actually considering baking in sustainability into a future or sustainability topics into a future reverse industry day that we conduct. So So I'd say I'm not necessarily aware of anything specific that we're hearing on the data front, but from industry. But I would flip it slightly and say, as it relates to data, we're looking at it in terms of our own data, right? What I mean is, this is why we're trying to leverage the synergies with other parts of the portfolio, like category management, right? We are looking to employ tools that will help us to figure out what we're buying, right? What are we buying? How are we buying it? When are we buying it? All sorts of data points, so that we can start to inform better procurement strategies that really, contribute to a stronger posture as it relates to sustainability. So that's one thing that we're doing as it relates to data. Definitely want to hear what industry can offer us in terms of their perspective, but really, we've got a host of data at our disposal. Every procurement organization in the federal government, really, even in the commercial sector, procurement is a data-rich environment. And so we're looking to try to action on our existing data in smarter ways to work with customers as it relates to shoring up, sustainable strategies, whether it's kind of at an individual post level. Hey, maybe we've seen some things that lead us to believe that, there's some opportunities here. Or, hey, maybe there's an opportunity to aggregate our demand in smart ways that would result in sustainable outcomes. I guess the only other thing I would offer here is we have a very large construction portfolio, probably one of the biggest in the federal government. So we absolutely are always on the lookout for information from that industrial base. We're very proud of our LEED certifications on all of our embassies that are going in that direction and getting those certs. So yeah, just data is absolutely king these days, and we want to action on it, whether it's industries or our own.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mike. And that there was a specific question on LEED standards that came in around state. Does state utilize LEED standards for sustainable construction? Sounds like the answer is yes. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Good. Great. Thanks. Jeff, maybe go to you with this question. It's kind of an interesting question, maybe something that's come out of the work the committee's done to date. But the question is there any thought been given to using the social cost of carbon to monetize life cycle CO2 emissions benefits in terms of using one material over another, and then using that to subtract from the cost, right, to help the winner, right? So basically to give the winner sort of a break, right, by kind of factoring in this social cost of carbon. Is that something maybe that's come up in the committee's work, or you've heard kicked around, or does the questioner have a new and interesting idea that he's injected into the debate?
Definitely an interesting idea. No, the committee has not got that far, but I think your questioner has been studying the climate financial risk executive order, because that very much is consistent with some of the things that are talked about in that EO. So as we see that one move through the rulemaking process, I think we would be very interested in exactly that conversation and about figuring out how do we best consider and use the social cost of greenhouse gases in procurement decisions.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Jeff, do you have any insight into why there are multiple executive orders, right, that are sort of overlapping here? Any sense for what the administration's strategy was around that? And no is an acceptable answer also, right? Because I know you're not living over in the White House, but I also know sometimes you get a call because you've been doing this a while and been very effective at it. But any sense for the strategy behind how these were sort of broken up and ordered?
No, afraid I cannot answer that one.
Okay, fair enough. So let's see. Actually, here's a sort of interesting question that came in. Mike, maybe I'll go to you first with this one. if you're an organization that primarily provides services to the federal government, and everyone knows the government buys more services than they do product at this point, how should that organization be thinking about this executive order? What kind of requirements might they see? What could they do to meet those requirements? You have any thought for this questioner?
Yeah, I'd point people to, again, we're going to be very interested in not just the service that you're providing us, but how you do it, right? So your supply chain, and does your supply chain have sustainability baked into it, right? So that's one thing I would suggest is really pay attention to your whatever the product, whatever the service is. Who all is involved in provisioning that service, and then do people have non-sustainable things? It could be, hey, you're leveraging a lot of product in order to provide that service to state or whoever. Look at those products. What are the environmental impacts of those products, and what are you doing to try to get them more sustainable? That's what I would offer there. And then really the EPA, I can't say enough about it. They have some fantastic resources out there, a lot of great recommendations. So look at the Water Sense, look at the Safer Choice, look at the Smart Way. And if your products aren't aligning to those statutory mandates, you should probably start looking at how you're going to recapitalize over time and start to move in that direction. And I'll offer one thing here, right? Jeff was kind of touching on it a little bit when he was talking about Alliant and some of the big GWAC stuff and the eval factors there. One thing I'm very mindful of is that sustainability is going to have a cost impact for industry, our industry partners, especially small businesses. There's no doubt, right? And I don't think that it's fair, right, to say, hey, look, everybody's got to rip the Band-Aid off, and you got to go and you got to make sure that all of your products line up with the certifications and the requirements right now, like today. I don't think that that's feasible or realistic, right? I think we want to work with industry to help industry get there, right? So in some cases, I think we're going to have hard requirements up front. No, show us that it's sustainable right now, because maybe it has a huge cost impact to us, and we care about that, or more importantly, environmental impact, and we care about that. But in some cases, it might be, hey, we're going to work with you over time to get you there. Show us that you've got a plan, I guess is what I'd say. So I just wanted to offer that I think that we all have to make an informed and educated, trade-off here. It can't just be rip the Band-Aid off and figure it all out today, especially when the same small businesses that we're dealing with in some cases are also trying to address cyber requirements, or you name it, right? I mean, there's a lot going on as it relates to federal contracts these days. And I think that we're going to have to preserve some trade space.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Sometimes ripping one Band-Aid off isn't so bad, but if you have a lot of Band-Aids and you want me to rip them all off at the same time, that could hurt. Jeff, sort of along the same line, question came in, talking about, again, this definition of sustainability and how it maybe is a little bit expandable. The question is really around forced labor, right? So, Mike talked about, hey, know what's in your supply chain, right? Know sort of what your suppliers are doing and what those products maybe that you're bringing in your supply chain are. Any sense for if the use of forced labor might kind of find its way into the definition of sustainable, and there's some thought given to that around the products and services that the government buys?
There definitely have been some of those kinds of conversations. Mike just mentioned some of the other key areas where we are addressing some public policy objectives. Labor is indeed number one of them. There have been a series of executive orders issued in the labor space. Some have been some have been implemented, such as the service contractor minimum wage increase. Some are still in process, such as product labor agreements. Some we are still thinking about, such as salary history ban. And yes, there are some definite conversations about the forced labor issues. There's a number of academic institutions, international organizations raising those questions, asking how does that get integrated into this overall picture, and where and how is it consistent with some of these objectives. But if I can jump back, I agree with just about everything Mike said, but there's one point that I think is so important, I really want to foot stomp that.
Sure.
Mike was talking about the importance of data in the acquisition system. We are enormous consumers of data, incredibly dependent on it. Years ago, we tried to do a whole lot in the absence of data, but there is a wealth of data available today. We operate in a big data world, and the number of decisions that get made off of dashboards, the focus on metrics, it drives so much of the acquisition system. So when we talk about the service contractors out there, well, you notice the proposed regulations are not exempting the service contractors. They very much want them, as Mike suggested, to understand their supply chains, to understand where they're getting what goes into producing that service, be that materials, be that knowledge, be that information conduits. So it is all about data. It is all about data in this space, as just about in every one of the topics that we could address right now.
Good. Thanks, Jeff. So we have more audience questions than we're going to have time to get to. I know we're coming kind of closing in on the end here. There is one question from the audience I wanted to get to. It's from a former FAS commissioner and former acting administrator, GSA. Good old Jim Williams, friend to all of us. So Jim has an interesting question. He said, hey, let's think beyond the definition of sustainability, right? Is there any discussion around providing some sort of credit or benefit advantage to companies that achieve what's called B Corp certification, right? That encompasses other factors besides sustainability. Are you familiar with that, with B Corp certification? Is that in the discussion at all? Is that, or are we just trying to solve sustainable first, and then maybe we'll move to B Corp second? Jeff, maybe you want to take that one first?
I am going to fall on my face on that one, Alan. I don't know enough about B Corp to offer any comments at all, but would love to hear more. So Jim, love to hear what you're thinking on that one.
Fair enough. You might be getting a call from our friend Mike. Any thoughts on that, or no?
So I'm in the same boat. Not as familiar with it. Would like to learn more, but I like the general idea of the extra credit, right? So I do think that sustainability is going to be something that is going to be front and center in terms of our best value trade-off decisions.
Yeah.
Like I said up front, we are starting to think about guidance and or hard policy that we would roll out that starts to give some preference. I'll go so far as to say that word, right? And if some of these certifications that Jim's talking about are demonstrating sustainability, right? Hey, that could be something that plays into our best value decision making. So I'm not. So where I'm at is I'm not going to write it off. I want to hear more about that, Jim. You got my number. Let's talk. But in general, absolutely, I think we're looking for creative ways to get to better enterprise decision making, and contracting is a huge part of that, and the best value trade-off is a huge part of that. So not writing it off.
Yep. Okay, good. Thanks. Appreciate that. Thanks for being flexible, taking something that was a little outside the topic area, but related, relevant. So we have about five minutes left, and I'll give you each 30 seconds or something to close. But let me ask one more question. Jeff, I'll start with you on this one. So kind of take a step back from implementing the executive order. as everybody knows, hey, we do elections in this country, right? And elections have consequences. So it's possible, right, that there could be a different administration come January of 2025, and if that happens, sometimes one of the first things administrations do is they get in and they start writing executive orders, right? So that we're talking about implementing executive order here. Is it what in your sense, what's the sort of staying power of the changes that are being made to kind of implement this executive order? And could sometimes I think folks in the federal government feel like they can get whipsawed a little bit, right? Where you have one set of executive orders and then boom, a different party comes in power and they literally sort of write an executive order that says don't do all that stuff, right? Do something 180 degrees different, right? So just Jeff, again, start with you. What do you think of the staying power of the EO?
Alan, absolutely right. The EO is not durable. The laws are durable, but that's why, for instance, we saw the Inflation Reduction Act as so important. Congress put billions of dollars into funding sustainability requirements in GSA, in commerce, in transportation, in a whole bunch of other agencies. And so that's a durable investment. That's things that are going to happen. Right now, there's a ton of momentum around electric vehicles. I talked about the national charging infrastructure. Something like that takes hold. That's not going to be reversed by the change of an executive order. We have a third FAR case, if I can talk about yet another one today. But this one is on sustainable procurement. It's addressing another of the section of the executive order. But that FAR case, it's not only addresses sustainable products and services, but it reorganizes, it simplifies, and it streamlines FAR 23. Between friends, that part of the FAR is a disaster. It's badly outdated. There's all kinds of random topics that suddenly appear out of nowhere: drug-free workplace, texting while driving. That obviously has nothing to do with sustainability. That's a case I would very much like to get finalized. And providing a cohesive message on sustainable and environmental matters, I think that will be enduring. So that's a third proposed rule. It's likely to be published for public comment later this year. But my favorite part of that one is it actually brings some rationality and organization into how the FAR talks about climate and sustainability.
Yeah, that's great, Jeff. Love the examples. Mike, any thoughts on that? I mean, you've been, and you just to give the audience, right, some sense. I mean, you're stating now you're a Coast Guard, right? But you were sort of an early guy at TSA, right? And kind of worked your way up there into some senior roles, right? But so you saw some kind of big change in the federal government moving bureaucracy. So anyways, any thoughts on that, the staying power of the EO and some of the changes?
Yeah, a couple thoughts here. I think Jeff is spot on. It's less about the executive order. It's law, right? But I would offer that I could have gone on and on about electric vehicles. We didn't even get a chance to talk about that, right? I love that Jeff mentioned that. We are looking at that in terms of our fleet, and we have a huge fleet overseas. That's an example of something that is getting so much momentum now. I don't think you're going to be able to turn it back, right? That's a thing, right? So I think in some areas there's just going to be so much momentum and frankly, some of that's been building for a long time, even before this administration, right? So some things I think will be enduring just because there's so much momentum and now interest in industry, and going in a particular direction. But I think really how you make it, long-standing is you bake it into culture. So the example I'll give you is the juxtaposition is DEIA, right? If we mean it, and we do, right, because it's the right thing, then you just start to bake it into your DNA, right? These are just things that we do, outside of whether there is an executive order still in existence or whether it got sunset by the next administration or, differences of interpretation of the law, right? As long as we're not breaking the law and in compliance with it, I think there are some things that we're going to be doing in terms of just inculcating into how we do business that you're not going to be able to turn back, because that's the right thing to do, right? So that's what I would offer there is some of it. The way to make it enduring is really just to say, hey, this is now standard practice for us, and let's make sure that we're always in compliance with the next EO. Let's play out a crazy scenario. Let's say the next administration, whatever party it is, says, "Oh, we hate sustainability," right? Kill all the EOs. No more laws in that area. Okay, we'll go in that direction, but I think that how we're structuring the way that we do our business, I think we'll still be okay, if that makes sense. We'll still be focusing on sustainability while we're meeting whatever the administration's priorities are, because it's the right thing to do.
Yep. Okay, good. Thanks, Mike. Hey, we're at time, but I said I'd give you each, kind of 30 seconds, maybe just one. If there's one thing, that the group should take away with listening here today, Jeff, what's just one quick thing you'd emphasize? And Mike, same to you.
Thanks, Alan. One key point, a lot of this is early, and industry input is critical to ensuring that we're doing this knowledgeably, logically, and without creating massive burden in the process. So please, we want to keep hearing from you as we move down this road.
Got it. Thanks, Mike. Anything you want to emphasize?
I could not have said it any better. Yeah, it's industry engagement, it's dialogue, real meaningful dialogue. Talk to us when you see requirements out there that you think could have been structured differently. I want to hear that, right? Let's have open, candid dialogue about things that we need to do to support the mission, and how we can weave sustainability into the requirements up front before we're even hitting pen to paper. So just outreach. We're opening our aperture, so be willing to engage in a dialogue with us, and understand that on our side, on the government side, we may not be as far along as our industry partners are. So be patient.
Yep. No, that's great. Well said, both of you. Hey, it's why you agree to spend an hour doing a webinar like this, right? To reach 150 or so folks. So thanks again to both of you for making time. Great dialogue. And thanks to the audience too for the good questions. We didn't get to everything, but we'll capture some of those and pass them along to you. So once again, thanks to you both, and have a great afternoon, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care.